In this episode, we begin with a practical idea that helps security become far more realistic for new learners. And that idea is walking through the whole life of an event instead of looking at one small part in isolation. Many people first study security operations by focusing on single tasks such as monitoring alerts, reviewing logs, or responding to a suspicious email, but real incidents do not arrive as neat, disconnected exercises. They unfold over time. They affect multiple teams, and they force people to make decisions long before and long after the most dramatic moment becomes visible. That is why full lifecycle scenarios matter so much. They help people understand how prevention, visibility, triage, escalation, containment, recovery, and learning all connect inside one unfolding story. Once you start seeing security this way, operations and incident response, IR, become less like separate topics and more like linked parts of the same effort to reduce harm and keep the organization functioning under stress. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A full lifecycle scenario is a realistic situation that follows an event from its early conditions through its later consequences, instead of stopping at the first sign of trouble. It may begin with something simple such as a weak process, a missing control, a user mistake, or suspicious activity that seems minor at first. From there, the scenario continues through detection, investigation, decision-making, communication, response actions, recovery steps, and post-incident improvement. For a beginner, this matters because security is often taught in fragments, and fragments can make the work seem easier to understand than it really is. In reality, the quality of response depends heavily on what happened before the alert appeared and what happens after the first response action is taken. A team can detect an issue correctly and still struggle if escalation is unclear, if communication breaks down, or if recovery planning is weak. Full lifecycle scenarios reveal that strong security is built across the whole chain, not at one isolated point. One reason these scenarios strengthen operations is that they help people understand context rather than just mechanics. A single alert review may teach someone how to look at suspicious behavior, but it may not teach them why that behavior matters to the organization, what assets are at risk, who needs to know, or what choices come next if the concern turns out to be real. Full lifecycle scenarios fill in that missing context by showing how a small technical clue can grow into a larger operational problem. A login anomaly may lead to account misuse, sensitive data access, a business interruption, and difficult communication decisions, all inside the same scenario. That wider picture helps beginners see that operations are not just about reading technical details correctly. They are also about understanding what those details mean for the business, how quickly uncertainty can grow, and why seemingly small decisions early in the chain can make later response far easier or far harder. These scenarios also strengthen IR because they force people to think beyond first reaction. Many new learners imagine response as the moment when a team finally identifies the incident and begins containing it, but that view is too narrow. A real response includes preparation before the incident, interpretation during the incident, and recovery plus learning after the incident. If training only focuses on the most dramatic middle portion, people may become good at saying what containment sounds like without understanding how they got there or what must happen once the immediate risk is reduced. Full lifecycle scenarios correct that problem by stretching the learning experience across time. They show how the incident was prepared for, how signs were noticed, how decisions were made, how systems were stabilized, how business operations were restored, and how lessons were turned into stronger future practice. That broader view makes IR feel more like a disciplined process and less like a sudden technical firefight. A helpful way to think about this topic is to imagine the life cycle of a storm. The dangerous moment of high wind matters, but it is not the whole story. Conditions build before the storm, warning signs appear, preparation makes a difference, the storm itself demands response, and the aftermath determines how well recovery and future resilience are handled. Security events work in a similar way. Full lifecycle scenarios teach teams to notice what set the stage for the incident, what early clues were available, how operations responded while the problem was unfolding, and what steps restored stability afterward. This matters because organizations often discover that their real weakness was not only in one missed alert or one delayed decision. Sometimes the deeper weakness was poor preparation, weak communication, unclear ownership, or an incomplete recovery plan. By following a scenario from start to finish, teams gain a more honest view of how security works in the real world, where technical, human, and operational issues constantly influence one another. The early part of a life cycle scenario is especially valuable because it teaches people to look at pre-incident conditions, not just incident symptoms. Before a real event becomes visible, there are often enabling factors already in place. Those might include weak password habits, excessive permissions, outdated software, poor asset visibility, inconsistent monitoring, unclear ownership, or staff that do not know what suspicious behavior should be reported. A full lifecycle scenario can begin by showing those conditions quietly building risk in the background. That helps learners understand that incidents are rarely born from nowhere. They usually grow in an environment where something was already too permissive, too invisible, or too poorly controlled. This lesson strengthens operations because it connects everyday security discipline to future response success. When teams see how pre-incident weakness contributes to later damage, they become more likely to value basic controls, monitoring quality, and operational consistency instead of treating them like routine tasks with little strategic importance. The detection and triage portion of a lifecycle scenario then shows how a possible problem first becomes visible and how people decide whether it deserves escalation. This stage matters because many incidents begin with ambiguous signs rather than with obvious proof. A user reports strange behavior, a monitoring system generates an alert, a privileged action appears at an unusual time, or a data transfer seems larger than expected. On its own, any one of these clues may be uncertain. Full lifecycle scenarios help learners practice asking what the clue means, what supporting evidence should be examined next, and how quickly the concern should move from observation to investigation. This strengthens operations because it forces teams to connect use cases, prioritization, and context in a realistic setting instead of in a vacuum. It also strengthens IR because the quality of early triage often shapes everything that follows, including whether the incident is contained early or allowed to spread while people hesitate. As the scenario develops, escalation and coordination become central, and this is where many organizations discover that their biggest problems are not purely technical. Once a concern starts looking real, the question quickly becomes who needs to know, what authority exists, and how decisions will be made without delay or confusion. A full lifecycle scenario helps participants practice that movement from analyst concern to coordinated organizational action. Security staff may need to involve operations, legal, privacy, leadership, communications, or business owners depending on the event. If that coordination has never been practiced across the whole event chain, people may find out too late that responsibilities are unclear or that different teams use different assumptions about urgency and evidence. These scenarios strengthen operations by exposing those coordination issues in a structured way. They strengthen IR by teaching that response is not only about detecting bad activity, but also about moving the right information to the right people quickly enough that meaningful decisions can still be made. Containment and short-term decision-making form another important part of the life cycle, because once an incident is active, the organization must choose how to reduce harm without creating unnecessary new problems. A full life cycle scenario lets teams explore those choices under realistic pressure. Should the account be disabled immediately, even if it belongs to a critical user? Should a server be isolated, even if that affects operations? Should a cloud setting be changed right away, even if the team is still unsure how broad the compromise might be? These are the kinds of choices that cannot be fully understood through isolated drills alone. When people see them inside the wider scenario, they better understand the trade-offs between speed, certainty, business continuity, and evidence preservation. That kind of learning strengthens operations because it helps teams appreciate why preparation and clear authority matters so much. It also strengthens IR because it trains responders to make decisions inside the messy reality of incomplete information and real consequences. Recovery is one of the most overlooked parts of security learning, and full lifecycle scenarios are especially useful because they refuse to stop once the obvious danger seems reduced. Many beginners think the work is finished when access is cut off or malicious activity is no longer visible. But the organization still has to stabilize services, verify trust, restore confidence, and return important business functions to normal operation. Recovery may involve rebuilding systems, validating data integrity, restoring clean access, communicating with affected groups, and watching for signs that the problem could return. A scenario that includes recovery teaches a much more complete lesson about what success actually means. Success is not only interrupting the harmful activity. Success is also restoring the organization in a controlled and trustworthy way. This strengthens operations by showing how security and business continuity are linked, and it strengthens IR by reminding responders that the end of the urgent phase is really the beginning of a different kind of disciplined work. Another powerful benefit of full lifecycle scenarios is that they improve communication across roles that do not normally see the entire security picture. Technical analysts may understand detection well, while managers understand business impact, and leadership understands organizational priorities, but each group can still miss how their decisions affect the whole chain. A scenario that runs from early conditions through final lessons helps each group see where it enters the story and how its actions affect the outcome for others. Analysts see why clear escalation matters. Leaders see why delaying a decision can increase technical damage. Business owners see why early reporting of unusual behavior matters, even when the evidence still feels incomplete. This kind of shared understanding is extremely valuable for beginners because it shows that security is not strongest when every role works separately. It is strongest when people understand how the chain connects, where their part matters, and how the handoff between roles can either support or weaken the full response effort. These scenarios also make after-action learning far more useful because they provide a complete story to review instead of a narrow technical snapshot. When a team looks back at a full lifecycle scenario, it can ask better questions. What conditions made the event possible? What early clues were available? Where did communication help or fail? Which decisions reduced harm? What slowed recovery? And what changes would have broken the chain earlier next time? That kind of review is much richer than simply asking whether the team eventually noticed the issue. It allows the organization to improve controls, monitoring, processes, authority lines, training, and recovery planning all at once because it has seen how those pieces interact. For brand new learners, this reinforces a major lesson. Security maturity grows when lessons are drawn from the whole event, not just from the loudest moment. Full lifecycle scenarios create the kind of evidence that helps organizations improve in a more complete and durable way. Of course, these scenarios only help if they are built thoughtfully. A poor scenario may be so unrealistic, so overly dramatic, or so technically tangled that people cannot connect the lessons to their real environment. A stronger scenario uses believable events, meaningful assets, realistic uncertainty, and decision points that reflect how the organization actually works. It should not exist only to prove that one team is smart or one tool is strong. It should exist to reveal how operations and I are function together across time. Beginners should also understand that the purpose is not to create perfect performance. The purpose is to expose gaps while the cost of learning is still low. If a scenario reveals that detection was slow, communication was weak, or recovery planning was incomplete, that is useful. The organization has learned something real about itself, and that learning can strengthen both operations and IR before a genuine incident creates far higher pressure. A common misunderstanding is that full lifecycle scenarios are too large, too advanced, or too time-consuming for ordinary teams. In reality, the scale can vary, but the value comes from the connected thinking, not from the complexity alone. A modest organization can still run a realistic scenario that begins with a suspicious email, grows into account misuse, triggers a response decision, affects a key business process, and ends with recovery and lessons learned. What matters is that the chain is visible from beginning to end. Another misunderstanding is that these scenarios belong only to formal exercises. They can also shape daily thinking by helping teams ask where an alert fits in a possible larger story, what earlier condition enabled it, and what later consequences may follow if it is real. That mindset strengthens operations every day because people stop seeing security events as isolated surprises and start seeing them as connected developments inside a life cycle that can be understood and influenced. As we close, the main lesson is that full life cycle scenarios make security operations and I are stronger because they show how an event really unfolds from early conditions through final recovery and improvement. They connect preparation, visibility, triage, escalation, containment, recovery, and lessons into one understandable chain, which helps beginners see that strong security depends on how those pieces work together rather than on any one step alone. They also help organizations uncover weak handoffs, unclear authority, slow decisions, and incomplete recovery planning before a real incident forces those weaknesses into view. Most importantly, they teach that operations and I are not separate worlds. They are linked through the full life of the event. When teams practice and think in that connected way, they become better at noticing risk earlier, responding more coherently, recovering more reliably, and learning more honestly from every scenario they face.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.